In 1894, a mansion was built in Newport, Rhode Island, where the horses lived better than most millionaires. The first floor had no bedrooms, no guest suites, no family quarters. Instead, the finest rooms on the ground level were stables designed like medieval throne rooms, complete with stained glass windows worth $50,000 each. That's $1.8 million per window in today's money. The owner, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, spent $3 million building this palace for his horses. In today's dollars, that's $108 million just for the construction. But here's what makes this story different from every other Gilded Age mansion tale you've heard. This wasn't just about excess. This wasn't just another rich man's folly. Belcourt Castle became known as America's most cursed mansion, where owners died suddenly, fortunes vanished overnight, and visitors reported being physically attacked by the objects inside. And here's what no one's talking about. The real tragedy wasn't the haunted armor or the mysterious deaths. It was how one man's obsession with appearing aristocratic destroyed not just his fortune, but created a building so strange, so fundamentally wrong, that it literally couldn't be lived in normally for over a century. If you're ready to see what really happened when American new money tried to buy European old world prestige, and why this mansion still terrifies people today, let's begin. Let's start with where the money came from, because you need to understand the scale of wealth we're talking about here. Oliver Hazard. Perry Belmont was born in 1858 into one of America's most powerful banking families. His father, August Belmont Sr., wasn't just wealthy. He was the American representative of the Rothschild banking family. Think about that. The Rothschilds, the family that financed European monarchies, chose August Belmont to manage their American interests. By the 1870s, August Belmont Sr. controlled assets worth approximately $50 million. In today's money, that's $1.4 billion. His banking house financed railroads, funded the Union during the Civil War, and underwrote government bonds. The Belmont family didn't just have money, they had the kind of institutional financial power that could move markets. Oliver was the youngest of August's sons, and that's important. He wasn't the heir to the banking empire. His older brother, August Jr., would inherit the business. Oliver would get money, lots of it, but not the power. And that distinction ate at him his entire life. Here's the real problem, though. Oliver grew up in a world where American millionaires were considered crude and classless compared to European aristocracy. His father had tried to buy respectability by marrying Carolyn Slidell Perry, a woman from an old American naval family. That's where Oliver got his ridiculously long name. Oliver Hazard Perry was his maternal uncle, a War of 1812 naval hero. But that wasn't enough. Not in the 1880s, not in the Gilded Age, when American industrialists were desperately trying to prove they were as cultured as European nobility. And here's what nobody talks about. This insecurity, this desperate need to appear aristocratic, was about to cost the Belmont family everything they'd built. Now let's look at what happened when Oliver came of age, because this is where the story gets strange. In 1876, at age 18, Oliver went to Europe. Standard practice for wealthy American sons, they'd spend a few years touring the continent, learning languages, gaining culture. But Oliver didn't just tour. He became obsessed. Specifically, he became obsessed with medieval knighthood, not as a historical interest, as an identity. He started collecting suits of armor, full medieval battle armor, ceremonial armor, jousting equipment. He spent $200,000 on his collection in the 1880s. That's $6.4 million in today's money, on old metal suits. But here's the kicker. He didn't just collect them, he believed in them. He studied medieval codes of chivalry. He learned about tournament rules from the 1300s. He commissioned replicas of famous knights' weapons. Friends said he talked about honor, nobility, and bloodlines constantly, as if he actually was a medieval lord transported to the 19th century. Wait a minute. Why would a Jewish German-American banker's son become obsessed with medieval Christian knighthood? Here's the part no one's talking about. Oliver was trying to erase his own background. His father, August Sr., was born August Schoenberg in the Rhineland-Palatinate region of Germany. He changed his name when he came to America, The Belmont family were German Jewish immigrants who'd made it big, and in the 1880s Newport social scene, that wasn't the right pedigree. So Oliver created a new identity. He would become more aristocratic than actual aristocrats, more obsessed with European nobility than European nobles themselves, and he would build a castle to prove it. Here's where the money started flowing out. In 1889, Oliver married Sarah Swan Whiting, a wealthy woman in her own right. Her father left her $2 million, approximately $64 million today. Combined with Oliver's inheritance when his father died in 1890, roughly $10 million or $320 million today, Oliver had the capital to build something unprecedented. And that's exactly what he did. But the tragedy was already set in motion, because what Oliver was about to build wasn't a home. It was a monument to a fantasy. And you can't live in a fantasy. In 1891, Oliver bought land on Bellevue Avenue in Newport. Prime real estate. The same street where the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and the Morgans were building their summer cottages. But Oliver didn't want a cottage, he wanted a castle, and he hired architect Richard Morris Hunt to build it. Now, Hunt was the architect of the Gilded Age. He'd designed the facade of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He'd built the breakers for Cornelius Vanderbilt II. He knew how to spend money. And Oliver gave him an insane brief. The mansion had to look like a Loire Valley hunting lodge. It needed a massive carriage house and stables on the first floor. The stables needed to be as grand as any ballroom. And most importantly, the horses had to live better than the people. Let me show you what that meant in practice. The first floor, 13,000 square feet, was entirely devoted to horses, carriages, and equipment. No bedrooms, no private family space, nothing for actual human living. Just stables with Gothic arches, stained glass windows, and imported tile floors. The stables could house 30 horses. Each stall had custom metalwork. The feed troughs were lined with porcelain. The walls were decorated with suits of armor positioned as if they were standing guard. One section had a full medieval tournament display, complete with lances, shields, and heraldic banners. It looked like a museum exhibit, except it was a stable. Here's the cost breakdown. Construction, $3 million or $108 million today. Interior furnishings and art, another $2 million, $72 million today. The armor collection, $6.4 million in today's money. The stained glass, $1.8 million per window, with over 30 major windows. We're looking at a total investment of approximately $200 million in today's dollars. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the layout. The second floor had bedrooms, yes, but they were small, cramped, because Oliver insisted on having a massive Gothic hall that took up most of the floor space. This hall was designed for displaying his armor collection and hosting medieval-themed parties. The third floor had guest rooms, but they were oddly shaped because the roof design, a steeply pitched French chateau-style roof, limited the usable space. So you had this bizarre situation, a $200 million mansion where the horses had palatial accommodations and the humans had to squeeze into whatever space was left over. Friends who visited called it uncomfortable. Sarah, Oliver's wife, reportedly hated it, but Oliver didn't care. He'd achieved his vision. He had a medieval castle in America, and he filled it with more artifacts. Medieval tapestries worth $50,000 each, Renaissance paintings, a massive fireplace imported piece by piece from a French chateau costing $100,000 to install. That's $3.6 million today. The mansion opened in 1894, and immediately people knew something was wrong with it. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a mausoleum, a very expensive, very strange mausoleum, where you could hear horses neighing from the ballroom above. Now, here's where the story takes a dark turn. Because Oliver's medieval fantasy was about to collide with very real consequences. In 1895, just 1 year after Belcourt was completed, Oliver did something that shocked Newport society. He divorced Sarah. Divorce in 1895 among the upper class was social suicide. It simply wasn't done, especially not by someone trying to establish aristocratic credentials. But Oliver didn't just divorce. He remarried immediately. And here's the kicker. He married Alva Vanderbilt. and Alva had also just gotten divorced from William Kissam Vanderbilt, one of the richest men in America. Let's look at the numbers. Alva's divorce settlement from William Vanderbilt, $10 million, which is $360 million in today's money. Plus, she got to keep Marble House, her $11 million mansion right down the street from Belcourt. In today's dollars, Alva walked away from her first marriage with nearly $400 million in assets. Why did Oliver marry her? Two reasons. First, money. His inheritance was being rapidly depleted by his lifestyle. Second, social ambition. Alva was connected to the Vanderbilt name, the most powerful social name in America. Oliver thought marrying her would cement his position in Newport society. But here's what no one's talking about. Alva was the wrong choice. She was controversial, ambitious, controlling, and she had her own agenda. She was passionate about women's suffrage and social reform. She didn't care about Oliver's medieval fantasies. She thought they were silly. The marriage was troubled from the start. They fought constantly about money, about how to use the mansions, about public image. Alva wanted to host suffragette meetings at Belcourt. Oliver wanted to host costume balls where everyone dressed as medieval nobility. These were incompatible visions, and the spending continued. Oliver bought more armor, more horses. He commissioned a $50,000 carriage encrusted with semi-precious stones, $1.8 million today, for a carriage that he used maybe twice a year. Alva spent money on political causes, funding suffrage campaigns and women's organizations. Between 1895 and 1908, the couple spent approximately $15 million. That's $540 million in today's dollars. Gone on displays, parties, causes, and collecting. And here's the real problem. They weren't generating any income. They were living entirely off inherited wealth. And inherited wealth, no matter how large, runs out when you're spending $500,000 a month. Friends said Oliver seemed different after marrying Alva. More anxious, more desperate to prove his status. He threw more elaborate parties, bought more expensive artifacts, as if he could spend his way into legitimacy, as if enough suits of armor would make people forget he was a banker's son playing dress-up. In June 1908, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont died, suddenly, at age 50. The official cause was blood poisoning from an infection, but here's what the newspapers didn't fully report. Oliver had been in declining health for months. He'd been under enormous stress. The spending had caught up with him. His fortune was nearly gone. He owed money to creditors. The fantasy was collapsing. Let's look at what was left. When Oliver died, his estate was valued at approximately $5 million. Remember, his father left him $10 million just 18 years earlier, and he'd married Sarah, who had $2 million, and then Alva, who brought $10 million from her divorce settlement. He should have had access to $22 million over those 18 years. That's $792 million in today's money. He died with $5 million, which is $180 million today. He'd burned through $612 million in modern value in less than 2 decades on horses, armor, parties, and trying to look like medieval nobility. But here's the real kicker. When they did the full accounting, they discovered Oliver had been borrowing against Belcourt. He'd taken out loans using the mansion as collateral. The $3 million property had liens totaling nearly $2 million. In today's terms, he'd mortgaged a $108 million mansion up to $72 million in debt. Alva inherited everything, but everything was mostly debt and illiquid assets. The armor collection was worthless on the open market. Nobody wanted to buy thousands of pounds of medieval metal. The mansion was too strange to sell. It was designed for horses to live on the first floor. What buyer would want that? And here's what nobody talks about. Oliver's death was the first tragedy in what would become a century-long curse, because Belcourt wasn't just expensive. It was wrong. Fundamentally, architecturally, spiritually wrong. You can't build a home where horses matter more than humans and expect good things to happen there. Wait a minute. That sounds superstitious. But stay with me. Because what happened next at Belcourt defies rational explanation. Alva inherited Belcourt in 1908. She didn't want it. She had Marble House, which she preferred, but she couldn't sell Belcourt. The market for medieval castle stables in Newport was, unsurprisingly, limited. So she did something strange. She closed it, mostly. She kept some staff to maintain it, but the mansion essentially sat empty from 1908 to 1940. 32 years. A $108 million property, vacant. And during those 32 years, stories started spreading. Staff reported hearing footsteps in the Gothic hall where no one was walking, horses that were no longer there, the sound of armor moving, doors that opened and closed on their own, lights appearing in windows when the electricity was turned off. Now, you might think these are just typical ghost stories. Old mansion, eccentric former owner, isolated location. Makes sense that stories would develop, but here's where it gets specific. And strange. Multiple staff members, in separate accounts, reported the same phenomena. The suits of armor would be found in different positions than where they were left, not fallen over, repositioned, as if someone had deliberately moved them during the night. Chairs in the Gothic hall would be found grouped together in the morning, even though they'd been arranged against the walls the night before. One particularly famous incident involved a large Gothic chair Oliver had brought back from Europe. Staff called it the murder chair because it supposedly came from a castle where someone had been stabbed. Multiple people reported sitting in this chair and feeling sudden, overwhelming dread. One servant claimed she sat in it and felt hands pushing on her shoulders, trying to force her down. She quit the next day. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what happened to the people connected to Belcourt. Alva died in 1933 at age 80, but in her final years she'd lost most of her fortune. The Vanderbilt money, the divorce settlement, all of it, gone. She died with less than $200,000 in liquid assets. That's $4.4 million today. A woman who'd once controlled $400 million reduced to basically nothing. Her son from her first marriage, Harold Vanderbilt, inherited both Marble House and Belcourt. He wanted nothing to do with Belcourt. He called it that cursed stable. He tried to donate it to the Preservation Society of Newport County. They refused. They didn't want to maintain it. The costs were too high, and the design was too strange. From 1933 to 1956, Belcourt sat essentially abandoned. 23 years of neglect. The roof started leaking. The stained glass windows cracked. The imported tile floors buckled from water damage. The armor rusted. It was decaying in real time. Here's what a $108 million investment looks like when nobody wants it. Worthless. The property taxes alone were $10,000 a year, which is $189,000 in today's money. But the mansion was generating zero income, and nobody would buy it. Several potential buyers looked at it and backed out. The common reason? It felt wrong, too dark, too heavy, too strange. In 1940, Harold Vanderbilt finally found a buyer. Edward J. Sheehan, a textile manufacturer from Massachusetts. Purchase price, $27,500. Let me repeat that. A mansion that cost $3 million to build in 1894, that would cost $108 million to build in today's dollars, sold for $27,500 in 1940. That's $590,000 in modern money. That's a 99.5% loss in value, almost total destruction of wealth. And here's the kicker. Even at that bargain price, Sheehan couldn't make it work. He tried to convert it into a restaurant, failed. The layout was too weird. Diners didn't want to eat in former horse stables, no matter how grand. He tried to rent it out for events, failed. People said the atmosphere was oppressive, uncomfortable. Sheehan owned it for only 2 years before selling it to George Waterman, a Rhode Island businessman, in 1942. Waterman paid $35,000, which is $650,000 today. He had big plans. He would restore it to its former glory and open it as a tourist attraction, Newport's version of a European castle tour. But Waterman ran into the same problems. The mansion fought back. Construction crews reported tools going missing, strange sounds during renovation work. One worker claimed he saw a figure in armor walking through a wall. He quit on the spot. Other workers refused to go into certain rooms, particularly the Gothic Hall where Oliver's main armor collection had been displayed, and the costs kept mounting. Every time they opened up a wall, they found more damage, more rot, more structural problems. The mansion had been designed for display, not for longevity. Oliver had cared about appearance, not engineering soundness. Water had gotten into the walls. The foundation was settling unevenly because the weight distribution was wrong. Too much heavy stone on the upper floors, not enough support in the basement. Waterman spent $200,000 trying to stabilize the structure. That's $3.7 million in today's money. And he still couldn't finish the restoration. In 1946, he sold the property at a loss. In 1956, a couple named Donald and Harl Tinney bought Belcourt. Purchase price, $42,000, approximately $475,000 in today's dollars. They had a vision. They would restore it properly, fill it with antiques and art, and open it as a museum. Finally, someone would respect Oliver's original vision. But here's what no one's talking about. The Tinney story is where the curse narrative really solidifies, because what happened to them at Belcourt was documented, photographed, witnessed by thousands of visitors over the next 56 years. The Tinneys spent decades restoring the mansion. They bought art and artifacts from estate sales across Europe. They acquired more suits of armor to replace pieces that had been sold off. They restored the stained glass. They refinished the floors. They opened Belcourt Castle Museum to the public in 1957, and almost immediately, visitors started reporting experiences. The chair that had terrorized servants in the 1920s? Still there. Still causing problems. The Tinneys started warning visitors not to sit in it, but people did anyway, and they reported the same sensations: dread, pressure on their shoulders, a feeling of being pushed down. Some people fainted, others ran out of the room. Then there was the ballroom. Visitors consistently reported cold spots in specific locations. Not vague, "Oh, it's a bit chilly," cold. Specific 20-degree temperature drops in precise locations. Harley Tinney confirmed this was measurable. They'd tested it. Certain spots in the ballroom were always 15 to 20 degrees colder than surrounding areas. No drafts, no ventilation issues, just cold. And the armor. Oh, the armor. Staff and visitors reported the same phenomena Oliver's original servants had described. Suits of armor found in different positions. Helmets that had been facing forward would be turned 90 degrees by morning. Swords that had been mounted on walls would be found on the floor, lying in neat rows, as if someone had carefully arranged them. But here's the real problem. The Tinneys started experiencing financial difficulties. The museum brought in revenue, yes, but nowhere near enough to cover the maintenance costs of a 50-room mansion with structural problems. They estimated they needed $50,000 a year just for basic maintenance. That's $500,000 to $70,000 in today's money. The museum might bring in $30,000 in a good year. The math didn't work. They started selling off some of their personal collection to cover costs: furniture, art, some of the artifacts they'd spent years acquiring, and both Donald and Harl reported feeling like the house was draining them. Not metaphorically, literally. They felt exhausted all the time. Harley said she felt like the house fed on energy, like it was a living thing that needed constant attention, constant money, constant life force to maintain itself. Donald Tinney died in 1992. Harl continued running the museum alone until 2012. That's 56 years the Tinneys owned Belcourt, and by the end, Harl was in her 80s, exhausted and financially struggling. The house had taken everything. In 2012, Harl Tinney sold Belcourt Castle. Purchase price, $3.6 million. After 56 years of ownership, after spending conservatively $5 million on restorations and maintenance, after dedicating their entire adult lives to the property, the Tinneys got $3.6 million. Let's do the math. If they'd invested that initial $42,000 in the S&P 500 in 1956 and left it alone, it would have been worth approximately $85 million by 2012. Instead, they got $3.6 million and 56 years of exhausting labor. The new owner was Carolyn Raphaelian, a jewelry designer and entrepreneur. She made her fortune founding a jewelry company that went from startup to $500 million in annual revenue. She had money, real money, and she had plans. Raphaelian spent $4.6 million on immediate renovations. She hired historians, architects, structural engineers. She was going to do what everyone before her had failed to do: make Belcourt functional as a modern luxury property while respecting its historical character. But here's the kicker. Even with unlimited funds, even with the best experts, even with modern engineering, Belcourt still fought back. Construction crews reported the same phenomena as workers in the 1940s. Tools missing, strange sounds, an oppressive feeling in certain rooms. One construction manager quit, saying the house was actively hostile to changes. Raphaelian invested more. By 2018, she'd spent over $13 million on the property between purchase and renovation. She opened it for special events, high-end tours, private functions. It was supposed to be Newport's premier luxury venue. But the finances didn't work. The operating costs were astronomical. Insurance alone was $200,000 a year because of the historical artifacts and the building's condition. Climate control to prevent further deterioration, $150,000 annually. Staffing, $300,000. Property taxes, $180,000. Before a single event was booked, the house was burning $830,000 a year, and the atmosphere remained wrong. Event planners reported that while the mansion photographed beautifully, guests didn't want to stay. They'd take their pictures, have one drink, and leave. They felt uncomfortable. Several wedding receptions were cut short because guests complained about feeling watched, about cold spots, about weird vibes. In 2021, Raphaelian defaulted on her loans. Her jewelry company had collapsed. She'd filed for bankruptcy. And Belcourt once again was about to change hands. The property went to foreclosure auction. It sold for $3.2 million. Less than what Raphaelian paid for it, less than what the Tinnies got for it in 2012. 127 years after it was built. 5 owners, tens of millions spent on maintenance and restoration, and Belcourt Castle was worth less than it had been a decade earlier. Now here's the part nobody's discussing. Why has Belcourt Castle consistently destroyed the wealth of everyone who's owned it? Why does a property that should be worth $30 to $40 million, comparable Gilded Age mansions in Newport, sell for that much? Why does Belcourt struggle to maintain a value of $3 million? Here's what the architectural historians won't say. Here's what the paranormal investigators miss. Here's what the economics analysis overlooks. There are 7 specific reasons this mansion became and remains a financial black hole. Reason 1. The fundamental design is anti-human. This isn't superstition. Oliver Belmont built a mansion where horses had priority over people. The most beautiful, most expensive, most carefully designed spaces were for animals. Humans were an afterthought, cramped into whatever space remained. You can feel this when you walk through it. Your brain recognizes something is wrong. The mansion violates basic principles of how humans interact with architecture. The proportions are off, the flow is wrong, the hierarchy is inverted, and you can't fix that without tearing down the entire building and starting over. No amount of renovation changes the fundamental DNA of the structure. Reason 2, the financial model was display, not utility. Oliver didn't build Belcourt to generate income or even to provide comfortable living. He built it to show off, to prove status, to display wealth. That means every design choice prioritized appearance over function. The stained glass windows, beautiful, but they don't provide good natural light. The Gothic hall, impressive, but it's terrible for actual living space. The grand staircase, dramatic, but it's in the wrong location for efficient movement through the house. You can't convert a display into a functional property without destroying what makes it historically significant. You're stuck with a beautiful prison. Reason 3. The maintenance costs are permanently unsustainable. Let me give you exact figures. The stained glass windows require specialist restoration every 15 to 20 years. Cost per window, $50,000 in today's money. There are 30 major windows. That's $1.5 million every 2 decades just for the windows. The slate roof needs complete replacement every 30 years. Cost $800,000. The heating system, you need climate control to prevent damage to the artifacts and the structure itself. Costs $150,000 annually to run. Insurance, $200,000 yearly. Property tax, $180,000 yearly. Staffing even a skeleton crew, $300,000 yearly. Before a single renovation or unexpected repair, you're spending $830,000 per year. To break even, you'd need to generate that revenue from tours, events, or rental income. But the mansion's strange layout and oppressive atmosphere limit its commercial viability. You can't get enough events at high enough prices to cover the overhead. Reason 4. The curse narrative has become economic reality. This is fascinating and nobody talks about it. Whether or not Belcourt is actually haunted doesn't matter anymore. It has the reputation. That reputation affects value in measurable ways. Insurance companies charge higher premiums because of the documented reports of visitors fainting, feeling ill, experiencing psychological distress. Event planners charge premium fees because it's harder to book guests. People don't want to spend extended time there. Contractors charge more because workers don't want to work there. The supernatural reputation has created concrete financial consequences. You're not just buying a mansion, you're buying a liability. Reason 5. The artifact collection is valuable but illiquid and burdensome. Here's something interesting about Oliver's armor collection and all the artifacts added since. On paper, they're worth millions. In practice, they're a nightmare. You can't sell them without destroying the historical character of the property. You can't insure them affordably. You can't properly secure them without spending hundreds of thousands on security systems, and they require constant climate control to prevent deterioration. So you have assets that add to your insurance costs, your security costs, your climate control costs, and your liability exposure, but that you can't actually convert to cash without gutting the property's identity. They're expensive jewelry you can't wear, can't sell, and have to guard 24/7. Reason 6. The market for Gilded Age mansions has collapsed. In 1894, there was a market for this type of property. Wealthy families wanted Newport summer cottages. By 1940, that market was dead. The income tax, the Great Depression, World War II, they destroyed the social class that wanted 50-room mansions. In modern times, even billionaires don't want properties like this. They want contemporary luxury homes with modern amenities, reasonable operating costs, and privacy. The market for a drafty castle stable with a reputation for being haunted consists of maybe 5 eccentric buyers worldwide. And they know you're desperate to sell. That gives you zero negotiating leverage. You're stuck with an asset that can't find buyers at anything close to its theoretical value. Reason 7. It's a trap that feeds on ego. This is the deepest reason. The same psychological vulnerability that led Oliver Belmont to build Belcourt in the first place. The need to prove status, to appear aristocratic, to display wealth. That same vulnerability traps every subsequent owner. You buy it thinking you'll be the one to succeed where others failed. You'll restore it properly. You'll make it profitable. You'll prove everyone wrong. You'll be the hero who saves the mansion. That ego investment leads you to pour more money in than rational analysis would justify. Just like Oliver did. Just like the Tinneys did. Just like Raphaelian did. The mansion doesn't need to be supernaturally cursed. It just needs to appeal to the same character flaw in each owner, the inability to admit defeat, cut losses, and walk away. You keep investing because giving up feels like personal failure. And that's how a $108 million mansion becomes a $100 million loss. And here's what makes this story relevant right now, in 2024. This exact pattern is playing out with modern wealth. Different assets, same mistake. Look at professional athletes. NFL players receive an average signing bonus of $5 million. Within 5 years of retirement, 78% have filed for bankruptcy. NBA players make an average of $7 million per year. 60% are broke within 5 years of leaving the league. Why? Because they confuse display with wealth. They buy cars, houses, jewelry, entourages, things that look impressive but generate zero income and have massive carrying costs. Just like Oliver's armor collection, just like Belcourt itself. Look at lottery winners. The statistics are brutal. 70% of lottery winners lose all their money within 5 years, not some of their money, All of it. Why? Because they immediately buy things designed to display wealth rather than generate it. Mansions they can't afford to maintain, cars that depreciate instantly. Investments in restaurants, nightclubs, and entertainment ventures that have 90% failure rates. They're not building income-generating assets, they're building displays, and displays drain wealth. Look at cryptocurrency nouveau riche, people who made $50 million on crypto in 2021. By 2024, many are broke. They bought Miami penthouses, Lamborghinis, and NFTs at peak prices. They invested in other speculative assets that crashed. They didn't understand the difference between paper gains and sustainable wealth. They thought having $50 million meant they could live like Oliver Belmont. It doesn't. Here's the real lesson from Belcourt Castle. Display destroys wealth. Savings build it. Oliver Belmont inherited the equivalent of $320 million. If he'd put that in conservative investments and lived on the returns, his family would still be wealthy today. Instead, he spent it proving he was aristocratic, proving he belonged, proving he was special. He built a monument to his ego. And that monument has been consuming fortunes for 130 years. This is happening today. Right now. Across every level of wealth, people are choosing display over sustainability, appearance over substance. They're building their own Belcourts. Maybe it's the luxury car they can't afford. Maybe it's the house that's too big. Maybe it's the lifestyle that requires constant income to maintain. Whatever it is, it's the same mistake. Different century, same outcome. Let's do the final accounting. Because the numbers tell the whole story. Oliver Belmont spent $108 million building Belcourt in today's dollars. He spent another $72 million on furnishings, another $6.4 million on armor. Call it $190 million total investment. When he died 14 years later, the property was worth maybe $90 million in today's terms and was mortgaged for $72 million. Net value, $18 million. He'd destroyed $172 million in wealth in 14 years. The Tinnies bought Belcourt for $475,000 in today's dollars. They spent approximately $5 million on restorations over 56 years. They sold it for $3.6 million. Total invested, $5.475 million. Total recovered, $3.6 million. Loss, $1.875 million, plus 56 years of their lives. If they'd invested that initial amount in index funds and worked normal jobs, they would have died with $85 million. Instead, they got $3.6 million in exhaustion. Carolyn Raphaelian bought Belcourt for $3.6 million, spent $13 million on renovations, lost it to foreclosure for $3.2 million. Loss, $13.4 million in less than a decade. Total wealth destroyed by Belcourt Castle since 1894, conservatively $187 million in today's dollars. That's accounting for just the major owners and documented expenditures. If you include all the minor owners, all the attempted businesses, all the failed renovations, all the carrying costs over 130 years, you're looking at over $250 million in destroyed wealth. $250 million gone, burned, consumed by a mansion built to house horses better than humans. And here's the darkest part. Belcourt is still standing. It's still there on Bellevue Avenue. The current owners are, once again, trying to restore it, trying to make it work, trying to succeed where everyone before them failed. And unless they fundamentally understand what Belcourt represents, unless they recognize it as a cautionary tale rather than an opportunity, they'll fail too. Because the mansion hasn't changed, the economic reality hasn't changed, the fundamental design flaw hasn't changed. You can't fix a building designed on the principle that animals deserve better than people. You can't make profitable a property built purely for display. You can't overcome the curse of ego. So here's what we learned. Oliver Belmont destroyed a fortune trying to buy status he could never truly have. He built a monument to medieval fantasy in an age of industrial progress. He prioritized horses over humans, display over function, appearance over reality. And that decision has reverberated through 130 years and 5 owners, destroying wealth at every step. The real tragedy of Belcourt Castle isn't the ghosts, the haunted armor, or the mysterious cold spots. The real tragedy is that it perfectly represents the Gilded Age disease, the belief that spending money on display equals having wealth, the confusion between looking rich and being wealthy, the inability to distinguish between assets that generate income and liabilities that consume it. Display destroys wealth. Savings build it. That's the lesson. That's what nobody talks about when they tell you about America's beautiful Gilded Age mansions. They show you the beauty, the craftsmanship, the history. They don't show you the balance sheets, the destroyed fortunes, the generational wealth wiped out in a single generation because someone needed to prove they belonged. And nobody's talking about this because it contradicts the American dream narrative. We want to believe that if you make enough money, you can spend it however you want. You can buy castles, you can collect medieval armor, you can live like royalty. But Belcourt Castle proves that's a lie. Making money and keeping money require opposite skills. Building wealth and displaying wealth are incompatible goals, and every generation has to relearn this lesson at enormous cost. Oliver Belmont learned it. The Tinneys learned it. Carolyn Raphaelian learned it. Right now, someone else is learning it, maybe with a mansion, maybe with a car collection, maybe with a lifestyle they can't sustain. Same lesson, different asset, same outcome. The curse of Belcourt Castle isn't supernatural, it's economic. And it's still claiming victims today. Next time, we're looking at another Gilded Age tragedy, the mansion that was so expensive, so excessive, that the family lost it before they could even move in. You won't believe how fast $50 million can disappear. Subscribe so you don't miss it.